listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniel Show. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniel Show.
You're listening to The Tom Daniel Show, and I'm your host, Tom Daniel. It was a rainy night in 1969 when a strange rumor began to spread around college campuses and radio waves. Paul McCartney, beloved bassist of the Beatles, was dead. Oh, not dead tired, not dead drunk. Dead, as in 6 feet under dead. Buried, gone, dead. And the man we'd been watching on album covers, TV appearances, and psychedelic rooftop concerts was supposedly a look-alike, an imposter, a double named William Campbell. In this special episode of The Tom Daniel Show, I will dive straight down into the infamous Paul is Dead hoax. Was it a wild conspiracy theory, a prank, or a hidden truth buried beneath layers of studio static and vinyl grooves? Let's rewind the tape, shall we? The origins of the Paul is Dead story trace back to the fall of 1969. A student at the University of Michigan named Fred LeBour was working on a research paper for his music appreciation class, and he'd chosen to analyze a Beatles song from 1967 called Strawberry Fields Forever. In the song's fade out, he thought he heard a strange voice say, "I buried Paul." I mean, that's pretty chilling to hear on a record, right? So he listened again, and was convinced he distinctly heard someone say, "I buried Paul." So he did the only logical thing he could think of. He put it in the paper, right into his research paper. And then if Paul is buried, then who's Paul? Well, the instructor loved it so much that he turned Fred's paper over to the student newspaper in Michigan, and that really got people buzzing about it all across campus. Other students started looking for other clues. Now, one of Fred's classmates read the article and called it into a Detroit radio station, WKNR-FM, and told the drive time DJ all about it. His name was Russ Gibb. Russ Gibb loved the concept, and he ran with it. I mean, he made it a regular feature of his radio show each day, beginning with these words. "If you play Revolution 9 backwards, it says, 'Turn me on, dead man.'" He invited his listeners to go back through their old Beatle albums and look for clues about Paul's death and replacement. Suddenly, a trickle turned into a flood. Fans began scouring Beatles records, covers, and lyrics, convinced they were uncovering a massive cover-up. As the clues poured into the station, the Associated Press picked up the story and ran it nationwide on the AP wire. Paul McCartney dead, replaced by an imposter. Now, from campus urban legend to global breaking news. Unbelievable. Now, back at WKNR-FM in Detroit, Russ Gibb and his listeners pieced the story together, and it was something like this. Paul died in a car crash on Wednesday morning, November 9th, 1966, at 5 a.m. He was driving his Aston Martin convertible home when he became distracted by a girl named Rita walking on the sidewalk, and he ran a red light. He was hit by a delivery truck in a horrific crash, and the details are pretty gruesome. Paul was decapitated, and the teeth knocked out of his skull. The car caught fire and burned. Pretty gross stuff. A crowd gathered at the horrific scene, but they didn't know who it was. Now, when the manager for the Beatles, Brian Epstein, got word that the police were trying to identify a body found in a white Aston Martin convertible, well, he immediately knew who that was. To avoid mass hysteria and heartbreak, the remaining Beatles replaced Paul with a look-alike who also happened to be a sound-alike, a policeman from Ontario named William Campbell, sometimes called Billy Shears. Now, some minor plastic surgery was required to complete the transformation, but a small scar was left on William Campbell's upper lip. Now, although William Campbell could take Paul's place in front of the camera lens, he wasn't a musician yet. Therefore, the Beatles suddenly made the shocking announcement that they would no longer perform live on stage ever again anywhere. And they didn't. From there, they could retreat into the studio and continue to release new songs without anyone realizing they were down one Beatle. And at the same time, they could teach William Campbell the ropes on how to be a Beatle. Does that sound too crazy to believe? Well, for many fans, the clues were too eerie to ignore. Every album added pieces to that puzzle, and it made fans feel like they were really onto something huge. So, let's start with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Now, the front cover alone of that album was enough to spark rumors. The Beatles, dressed like a marching band, are standing at a grave site surrounded by wax figures and people with somber faces. A hand floats ominously above Paul's head, a symbol of death in some cultures, or simply calling attention to Paul's head in general. Remember, he was decapitated. Paul is the only Beatle holding a wooden instrument, an English horn, while the other three Beatles are holding metallic instruments, a flute, a trumpet, and a French horn. The yellow hyacinths at the gravesite are shaped like a left-handed bass guitar, but they only have 3 strings instead of 4. Paul is also a lot taller than he usually seems to be. Also clearly visible on the front cover, we see a car on fire, a toy Aston Martin car sitting on a doll's leg, and a Hindu deity named Shiva the Destroyer who is pointing straight up at Paul. Now, one commonality among many of the clues is a repeated theme of 3 Beatles doing one thing, while one Beatle does something different and doesn't match the others. And that one is always Paul. So not only is Paul the only Beatle holding a wooden instrument, he's also the only Beatle facing straight into the camera as the other 3 are turned slightly profile. Now, perhaps the biggest clue on the front cover is the large bass drum right in the middle, which reads Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Now, if you place a mirror flat across the words Lonely Hearts and read the reflection, it says 11IX he die. Now, 11 is the number 11, and IX is Roman numeral 9, so 11/9 he die, or more properly, November 9 he die. I mean, how likely is that to just be a coincidence, right? Incredibly specific. Now, even if you're skeptical, it's still enough to give you pause. Now, when you open up the album gatefold, what about the patch on Paul's uniform? It says OPD, interpreted by fans as either officially pronounced dead or Ontario Police Department. But wait, there's more. On the back cover, 3 Beatles are facing forward, Paul is facing backwards. And again, he's incredibly taller all of a sudden. Now, most compellingly, George is pointing at something with his finger. And if you look at the specific lyric printed on the back cover right above George's finger, it says, Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock, the day and time of the car crash. I mean, it's so blatant. There's not one single all-encompassing, earth-shattering clue, but when you put them all together, it becomes pretty compelling, doesn't it? And then there's the music. The title song seems to introduce the world to a new singer in the band named Billy Shears, who might sing out of tune, because remember, he's the imposter, still learning the part. Now, there's a song about a girl named Rita, and another song about someone who loses his life while the rooster crows and people are saying good morning. However, the final song is really the creepiest. The first 2 verses of the song A Day in the Life very accurately describe a scene where someone famous was killed in a car crash. Now, although Sgt. Pepper was loaded with clues, no one got it when it first came out. So the Beatles couldn't help themselves, and they kept lobbing more random clues at their fans with subsequent albums. Now, when we come back, we'll comb through those other albums and a lot more clues. You're listening to The Tom Daniels Show. We'll be right back.
What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show.
Welcome back to the Tom Daniels Show. You know, I had a feeling Mary Mac was going to try and do something Beatley again for the song. Rip, you nailed it, man. Mary Mac is the world's most perfect band. Now, the next album was Magical Mystery Tour, and it was action-packed with clues as well. On the front cover, 3 Beatles are wearing fuzzy white costumes, and 1 Beatle is wearing a fuzzy black costume, as that one clearly doesn't match the others. However, you can't tell which one it is exactly because they're all wearing masks, and the one in the fuzzy black costume is wearing a walrus mask. So, ostensibly, you're supposed to figure out which one is the walrus. There was a photo booklet included inside the album, and many of those pictures are a little bit disturbing. And one photo, Paul is standing barefoot while his nearby shoes are dripping with blood. And Ringo's drumhead reads, "Love the 3 Beatles." Well, you know, that's just weird. And by the way, the barefoot thing comes back later. Now, in another photo, all the Beatles are wearing white tuxedos with carnations, except that 3 of them are wearing red carnations in the lapel, and only Paul is wearing a black carnation. Paul is also photographed sitting at a desk behind a sign that reads, "I was you." And there are several photos of Paul with a hand raised over his head, that old theme again. Now, the music adds a lot more fuel to the fire as well. The song "I Am the Walrus" is absolutely loaded with clues, including the last words spoken by Humpty Dumpty before he damaged his head. And those last words were "Goo Goo Gajoob." Also, Strawberry Fields Forever's on this album, which has the "I buried Paul" line in there. John would later claim that what he was saying was cranberry sauce, but by then it didn't matter. I mean, the myth had taken root. Now, in 1968, the Beatles released the White Album, which contains photos that clearly show the plastic surgery scar on William Campbell's upper lip. And the song "Don't Pass Me By" contains a verse about someone who was in a car crash and lost their hair. The song "Glass Onion," however, it blatantly tells everybody, "Here's another clue for you all, the walrus was Paul." I mean, it's like, okay, people, pay attention here. And then there's the backmasking. Now, the Beatles didn't invent backmasking, which is hiding sounds or words that could only be heard when you play it backward, but they were certainly pioneers of the technique. To fans of backmasking, this album was a gold mine. The song "Revolution 9" begins with a recording engineer repeating the words "number 9, number 9, number 9" over and over again. If you play that in reverse, what you hear is, "Turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man." Additionally, there are car crash noises, fires, crying, and screaming during that track. Now, the song "I'm So Tired" ends with a bunch of nonsense gibberish spoken by John. But if you play that backward, you'll hear John say, "Paul is dead, man. I miss him, I miss him, I miss him." Man, the dedication from fans to find all this stuff is really incredible. Now, just a few months after the release of the White Album was when Fred LeBour found his first clue, which means that fans were anxiously anticipating the next album in their search for new clues. They weren't going backwards looking at old albums. Now they were looking for the new clues. The Beatles didn't disappoint them either. The next album was the iconic Abbey Road, which was loaded with clues. On the front cover of Abbey Road, Paul is barefoot again. He's out of step with the others, holding a cigarette in his right hand when he's very famously left-handed. Now, there's a black hearse parked on the curb, and they're all 4 dressed as if they're in a funeral procession. Ringo wears black like an undertaker, John's in white like a preacher, George is in denim, he's the gravedigger, and Paul is the corpse in a cheap suit with no shoes. Now, the license plate on the VW in the background reads 28 if, as if in Paul would have been 28 if he were still alive. Now, by the way, the VW pictured is a beetle. I don't know if that makes any difference or not. And that's just the front cover. On the back, there's a crack in the wall running through the word Beatles. And if you know how to play dot to dot, then you can draw 3 Beatles on the wall. There's also a shadow in the form of a skull right next to the girl, and the girl must be Rita, who's distracting you. Creepy? Sure. Coincidental? Maybe. Maybe not. And then there's the music. One song sings about 1 and 1 and 1 being 3. And another song sings about a man who quit the police department and got a steady job. William Campbell leaving the force to become Paul. Now, the final album released by the Beatles came out in 1970, and it was called Let It Be. Since the lads were on the verge of breaking up, I guess they didn't really see the need to include many more clues, because Let It Be is kind of sparse. On the front cover, Paul is once again the only Beatle staring straight into the camera while the other 3 are looking off to the side. And also, he's the only one framed with a blood-red background around his head, while the others have white backgrounds around their heads. It's amazing how widespread this became. And it wasn't just music fans, because it became a whole global phenomenon and part of pop culture as a whole. It seeped into the mainstream consciousness. Of course, you didn't even need to be a Beatle fan to get in on the deal, as the June 1970 issue of Batman Comics shows Batman and Robin sitting in a graveyard studying a Beatles album for clues to figure out which Beatle is the dead one as they watch the Fab Four stroll out between the headstones. And Paul is even barefooted on the cover for good measure. Now, in late 1969, Life magazine tracked down Paul McCartney to his farm in Scotland. They published photos of a bearded, barefoot Paul, of course, alive and well feeding sheep. And he told the reporter, "Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. If I were dead, I'd be the last to know." And that was that, right? Or was it? To many fans, Paul's reappearance was just another layer in the cover-up. I mean, after all, wasn't that just William Campbell, the imposter? I mean, that proved nothing. What was he supposed to do, confess everything? And when had the Beatles ever given a straight answer to anything? So the denial itself became kind of part of the conspiracy. So looking back at all this, what was Paul is Dead, really? Was it a massive prank that just spun out of control? Was it all just a big fat coincidence? A clever avant-garde marketing stunt by a band known for turning pop music into performance art? Or was it something darker? Some say the Beatles just got tired of living the lie and began dropping hints to confess. However, there is a condition known as apophenia, also called patternicity, whereby humans tend to see patterns in randomness where none actually exist. Therefore, it's also possible that obsessive fans just saw what they wanted to see, patterns in the noise. Now, this would suggest that the whole thing was fan-driven instead of Beatles-driven, and that the story was built from the clues instead of the other way around. Now, whatever the case, Paul is Dead still endures. It's fascinating either way. I mean, no matter the truth, the Paul is Dead phenomenon is really just incredible. A really strange echo from the psychedelic age. It tells us so much about how we interact with music, with celebrity, with media, and how stories can take root, how belief works in a community. It's also a powerful reminder that music doesn't just play with our ears, it plays with our heads. Now, whether you believe the clues or think it was just a perfect storm of paranoia and poetry, one thing is for sure. The Beatles, in one way or another, never really stopped messing with us. Thank you for joining me on this journey into my favorite musical mystery. If you enjoyed the episode, hit subscribe, leave a review, Tell a friend who still swears by vinyl. And remember, sometimes the biggest legends are buried not in cemeteries, but in the grooves of a vinyl record. This has been the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening. Keep learning.
Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniels Show. Take a break from your usual routine and tune in to the Tom Daniels Show. You'll discover the world of melodies and stories that you might not know. Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniels Show.